Imagine a cold December night in Boulder, Colorado. 28 years after 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was found lifeless in her family home, the world has expected closure, confession, or a moment of raw emotion from her closest kin. Until now, her father, JonBenet Ramsey, has remained guarded, almost mute, letting investigators and tabloids shape the narrative. But tonight, after nearly 3 decades, he finally steps into the spotlight to offer the world answers. And when he speaks, no one will be prepared for the shocking truths he reveals. From the first seconds, the tension is palpable. A devoted engineer, a doting father, and a man whose reputation was once intertwined with grief and suspicion, John Ramsey opens up with a voice trembling between remorse and relief. His first words pierce the silence. "I've carried this secret every single day of my life." The camera holds steady on his weathered features, the faint lines etched by sleepless nights. He leans forward, hands clasped like a man bracing for confession. Contrast that with the icy composure he displayed in public appearances and interviews over the years. Tonight's absence of his usual restraint signals that everything is about to change. We flash back to December 26, 1996. A festive holiday morning turned into a nightmare. Instead of laughter and presents rescue crews and flashing lights, a crime scene tape around a bedroom drenched in mystery. The pageant queen pinned in her little white nightgown, a ransom note speculating truths and lies written by a hand that remains unidentified. The nation watched in horror, devouring every headline and whisper, while questions spun into decades of theories. Dozens of suspects. Endless court of public opinion. All the while, John Ramsey stood in the eye of that storm, stoic yet scarred by grief, refusing countless interview requests, shielding his private pain from the world. In his long-awaited address, he revisits that fateful morning, every memory cut with precision and regret. "I'll never forget the sound of our front door closing, the echo of footsteps that sounded like hope turning into dread." He closes his eyes as if to summon that moment. The subtle quiver in his voice reminds viewers that heroism and heartbreak often live in the same heart. Then, he drops a revelation that shatters years of speculation. He received an anonymous letter just months after JonBenet's death, a letter that holds a confession so chilling that law enforcement has buried it until now. His silence was never indifference, it was protection. Of evidence, of reputation, and of the fragile truth that could undo or redeem him. Now, the audience hangs on every word. The world wonders, why release this now? The answer comes wrapped in regret and determination. Ramsey explains that the pursuit of closure has become his life's work, a quest he could no longer endure in solitude. He describes sleepless nights spent reviewing case files under the dim glow of a desk lamp, tracing every lead and cross, referencing unheeded details and margins. Contrast that desperate vigilance with the image of him as a pragmatic engineer, building structures by day and haunted by unsolved puzzles by night. That dual identity defined his decades of silence. His next segment delves into the most explosive element, the letter itself. Addressed to "Dear Mr. Ramsey," its language is measured but morbid. It confesses intimate knowledge of the family's routines and paints a picture of an intruder familiar with the house. The handwriting matches samples from an obscure suspect who was dismissed early in the investigation. Until now, the FBI and Boulder detectives locked that theory away, stymied by incomplete DNA evidence and murky alibis. But Ramsey claims he safeguarded that letter in a secure vault, waiting for scientific advances that have finally breathed life into dormant clues. It's a stunning claim. One that threatens to upend the official timeline and refocus the investigation on a new lead. John Ramsey's voice softens as he recounts heartbreak before steely resolve when he reveals the scientific evidence set to rewrite history. He explains how advanced genetic genealogy, reserved for uncovering medical ancestry, has now unlocked the letter's secret DNA code, tracing it back to a living relative of the prime suspect. "Tonight, we know more than ever before," he declares, eyes burning with determination. "And we will see justice for my daughter." He recalls JonBenet's love of ballet, her laughter echoing through ornate hallways. He describes the thrill in her eyes when she mastered a new dance move, and the pride he felt when she won her first beauty pageant. Contrast that innocent joy with the photographer's lens capturing a small, frozen smile forever etched in a solemn, haunting portrait. John Ramsey's announcement sent shockwaves through every corner of the globe. News outlets interrupted their regular programming, rolling footage of him sitting in a dimly lit study, the letter in his hands like fragile proof of decades-old nightmares. His voice echoed once more. "For too long, I held back because I feared the truth might tear us all apart. But the truth, no matter how painful, must be told. In the hours following his revelation, social media became an avalanche of theories, old suspects dragged back into the spotlight, and armchair detectives scrambling for scraps of information they'd long forgotten. Yet amid the frenzy, law enforcement agencies responded with cautious optimism. The Boulder Police Department released a brief statement confirming they had received new evidence and were coordinating with the FBI to verify the DNA findings. The statement struck a careful balance, acknowledging hope without promising premature conclusions. After all, this case had survived more wrongful accusations than any other high-profile unsolved crime in American history. Investigators had already begun the painstaking work of cross-referencing the genetic profile extracted from the letter against national databases. Thanks to advances in forensic genealogy, what once required years of painstaking detective work could now be narrowed down within weeks. John Ramsey explained how he secured the letter in a climate-controlled vault at his home, preserving a single envelope that bore not just the threatening words but also the microscopic traces of an unknown perpetrator. When he first handed it over to authorities, he was told that DNA labs lacked the tools to decode the evidence. Now, after the same techniques that identified a suspect in a cold case murder, the Ramsey letter has been reopened and re-examined. The revelation that the handwriting matched early samples from a dismissed person of interest underscored how investigative biases can derail justice. That early suspect, a housekeeper's cousin who worked at the Ramsey home only briefly, had long ago been cleared because he passed an initial polygraph test and offered a plausible alibi. No one had followed the lead beyond cursory interviews. Tonight, John Ramsey demanded a full review of those files. He urged investigators to re-interview witnesses, re-examine the alibis, and apply modern scientific standards without prejudice. Reports began to surface about the prime gene match, a man in his mid-30s living on the outskirts of Denver. Someone with no criminal record but a history of emotional instability flagged in childhood psychological evaluations. Family members described him as reclusive and prone to angry outbursts. He had been present at local police stations years ago, once reporting a break-in at his own residence that lacked any credible evidence. At the time, authorities suspected a hoax or self-inflicted damage designed to draw attention. Now, those incidents have taken on a new light. Behavioral analysts suggest the actions fit a profile of someone obsessed with eliciting fear and confusion, a signature that matches the sadistic tone of the Ramsey letter. Law enforcement sources, still speaking under condition of anonymity, say that detectives are building a timeline to place this individual in Boulder at the end of December in 1996. They're combing flight records, credit card receipts, and lodging logs for any sign of his presence near the Ramsey home. If the paper trail aligns, the decades-old mystery may finally have a physical suspect to question under oath. Meanwhile, the media spectacle intensified. Cable news panels split screens between the Ramsey announcement and heated debates over prosecutorial challenges, statute of limitations, jurisdictional hurdles, and the risk of contaminating fragile DNA evidence. True Crime Podcast hosts updated their listeners in real time, urging subscribers to share any obscure tidbits they recalled from old news stories. Conspiracy forums buzzed with sensational claims that the real mastermind was closer to the family than anyone realized. Yet amongst the clamor, a surprising number of voices praised John Ramsey's courage. Viewers who once viewed him with suspicion offered words of empathy, acknowledging that his decades of silence had been a burden he finally refused to carry alone. His appeal for unity, for a collaborative push to unearth the facts, resonated with an audience fatigued by endless speculation and eager for definitive answers. Back in Boulder, local residents felt the familiar tension of living in a true crime epicenter. Bars replayed old television specials, bookstores stocked fresh printings of JonBenet case files on crowded shelves, and residents jockeyed for prime spots in front of Fox News cameras parked near the Ramsey house. Community leaders organized a candlelight vigil, not in mourning, but in solidarity, a gesture of support for a father's long, agonizing quest for truth. Yet the crowd was divided. Some held signs demanding a wider review of past investigations. Others called for an apology from the police for prematurely ruling out certain suspects. One group protested outside the district attorney's office, chanting, "We want justice now!" even as the DA's spokesperson reminded them that proper procedure would take time, months, perhaps years, to unfold. Inside the hallowed walls of the Ramsey family home, memories clung to every corner like dust. Photographs of JonBenet 5, her beaming eyes framed by thick hair ribbons, still lined the mantel. Her pink ballet slippers, displayed beneath glass, looked as though she might slip them on and dance down the hallway at any moment. John Ramsey, once a man of unbreakable stoicism, admitted on camera that these relics nearly broke him. Yet he resisted the urge to erase every trace of his daughter's life, recognizing that the artifacts represented not only heartbreak, but also the innocence he seeks to protect with his confession. "For too long, this house has been a mausoleum," he said. "Tonight I want it to become a place of hope once more." As the night deepened, John Ramsey's words carried a haunting invitation. "To everyone who lost sleep wondering if we'd ever see justice, I say this: stay with us. Demand accountability. Hold the system to its promise." In those final moments, he turned his gaze from the camera, lifted the sealed letter, and placed it respectfully on the desk. The scene faded to black, leaving viewers to grapple with the magnitude of what they'd just witnessed. Who was this suspect hidden in plain sight? Could justice finally bloom after 28 years of confusion, mistrust, and unanswered questions? Or would revealing the truth rip open fresh wounds? Only time and the relentless pursuit of facts would tell. Morning news bulletins woke to the revelation that traced its roots back 28 years, resurrecting nightmares that many believed had settled into cold ashes. As John Ramsey's confession circulated, the tick of disbelief trembled in every newsroom. People paused while scrolling through feeds, jaws dropping at how a single letter could append layers of courtroom drama and conspiracy theories alike. The statement he released was not a mere echo of old pain. It was a seismic shard of new evidence. Across social channels, threads sprouted like wildfire. What had he known all these years, and why now? The surge of questions threatened to drown out every previous theory, propelling a sense of urgency that found even casual observers leaning in closer. Anchors globally interrupted broadcasts, stunned into silence by the revelation. Behind closed doors in the Ramsey household, the ripple of John's disclosure awakened dormant emotions. Patty, his wife, whose own grief had been as private as the family's silent prayers, emerged alongside him onstage. Her eyes, once damp with restrained tears, now glistened with determination. Their surviving children, now adults, watched from the wings, each grappling with a maze of relief and fear. Memories of childhood dinners, joyful birthdays, and bedtime stories intertwined with the agony of that one unthinkable morning. Contrast framed their stooped expressions and sudden strength, the enduring weight of loss versus the newfound weight of purpose. When Patty pressed her hand to John's arm, the moment became more than public spectacle. It became a testament to a family's fragile resilience. Their united front radiated hope and demanded action. At the courthouse steps, the legal gears began grinding at a speed few expected. The county district attorney convened an emergency hearing to assess the admissibility of Ramsey's evidence. Prosecutors, defense counsel, and FBI agents sat in heated deliberation, parsing every word of forensic reports. The question weighed heavily: could a document sealed for nearly 3 decades still hold court? Ethics experts argued that statute of limitations concerns might arise, but conceded that murder charges remain timeless. In swift contrast to the sluggish pace of cold case reviews, deadlines were set in days, not months. Subpoenas flew out for travel logs, phone records, and witness statements that had been archived and forgotten. The courtroom's hushed anticipation echoed with the promise of new chapters. Justice cannot wait ever. No more delays. Meanwhile, the Boulder community grappled with renewed spotlight on their tranquil mountain town. Local coffee shops buzzed with hushed conversations about the next legal rendezvous. Memorial benches that had once been dusty monuments to a forgotten tragedy underwent fresh refurbishment as volunteers painted names and etched dates. The downtown plaza, usually serene, transformed into an impromptu forum. Residents of all ages debated the merits of confession, evidence, and empathy. Civic leaders called for informative town halls and public Q&A sessions with investigative teams. A grassroots petition circulated demanding transparency and accountability at every step. Churches offered prayers for healing, while political figures walked a tightrope between condolence and judgment. In this fractured yet united setting, Boulder's cultural tapestry revealed both pain and promise. Vigil lanterns softly flickered into the night. Legal analysts speculated that forensic breakthroughs, once confined to academic journals, had become the public's beacon of hope. A leading criminal psychologist described the letter's tone as designed to provoke terror rather than seek ransom. His analysis suggested the suspect's intent centered on psychological domination and manipulation. Meanwhile, a renowned DNA specialist outlined the hurdles ahead, extracting viable genetic markers from fragile paper fibers and matching them against incomplete genealogical databases. She stressed the necessity of flawless chain of custody protocols to avoid contamination. Debate flared over whether advanced phenotyping could reconstruct a suspect's face from trace DNA, reviving ethical dilemmas around privacy and profiling. These expert voices underscored an investigation fueled by innovation yet constrained by legal and moral complexities. Community groups demanded transparency at each step of the process immediately. As dawn broke over the Rocky Mountains, an electric current of anticipation pulsed through the air. Viewers around the world were left on edge, knowing that every fact unearthed carried the weight of a girl's stolen future. Would the suspect finally face questioning? Could jurors, decades after the crime, weigh fresh evidence without prejudice? What impact would this seismic moment have on forensic science, legal paradigms, and collective conscience? One thing was certain: John Ramsey's long silence had transformed into an urgent rallying cry. And his next move, unsealed court filings, live testimony, or another dramatic interview, was anyone's guess. Stay tuned, subscribe, and join the conversation as this 28-year odyssey hurtles toward a potential reckoning. The story is far from over, and the world watches with bated breath. Stay engaged. Within days of the district attorney's authorization, law enforcement moved swiftly on a quiet suburban cul-de-sac outside Denver. At dawn, tactical teams wearing unmarked jackets surrounded a modest two-story home, its garden dotted with early morning dew. Neighbors stirred as officers broke padlocks, rifled through locked cabinets, and sealed off rooms in a precise sequence designed to preserve fragile evidence. Photographers captured the moment a handcuffed suspect emerged, eyes downcast, escorted to waiting squad cars. 4 cardboard boxes of journals, sketches, and digital drives were loaded onto evidence carts, their contents destined for high-security laboratories. For years, this man had been person of interest in dusty bulletins. Today, he was a living, breathing figure at the center of a global reckoning. At the downtown Denver police headquarters, the interrogation room glowed under fluorescent lights, its walls acoustic foam to muffle every word. The suspect, flanked by an FBI agent and a Boulder detective, faced a laminated copy of the Ramsey letter. Forensic technicians took turns explaining how modern DNA retrieval methods had extracted touch DNA from the envelope's seal. Traces of skin cells matched through genealogical triangulation to his extended family tree. His defense attorney looked on, confidence eroding as half a dozen swabs of paper fibers were shown in microscopic detail on a mounted monitor. Under the weight of incontrovertible science, the man's demeanor crumpled. He slumped forward, voice scarcely audible. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt. It was just supposed to scare, not kill." News of the arrest rippled outward, met with goosebumps among true crime devotees and dread among casual onlookers. Social feeds exploded with images of evidence tags and mugshots, while hashtags like #PayJonBenetCase and #FevJusticeForJonBenet trended worldwide. Pundits assembled panels on cable networks, speculating on whether this development meant a swift trial or a protracted legal battle. Live streaming influencers camped outside police barricades, broadcasting updates to tens of thousands of subscribers hungry for every drip of information. Memorable sound bites, like a detective's cautionary note on the fragility of cold case evidence, echoed across podcasts and virtual forums into the late hours, fanning embers of hope that after 28 years, closure might finally arrive. Within the Ramsey home, the atmosphere was electric but tender. John and Patty Ramsey met with private counselors to prepare for the suspect's first court appearance. Their daughter's childhood trinkets, once stowed behind velvet curtains to shield them from the glare of tabloid photographers, were brought forward for support. JonBenet's pink tiara, her ballot slippers, and the framed white dress she wore on that fateful morning. John spoke of sleepless nights and an unending ache that transformed into resolve. Patty's voice trembled as she mapped out questions she wished investigators would ask. Why did he linger in our house after the ransom note? What drove him to wield cruelty like a weapon? Their children, now adults, hovered in the doorway, bracing for each revelation. In their shared grief, they found renewed strength, determined that JonBenet would at last have a voice in her own story. Legal scholars dissected the bristling challenges ahead. One professor warned that decades-old evidence faced rigorous admissibility scrutiny under rules that guard against tainted samples. A former prosecutor noted that the statute of limitations does not apply to murder, but cautioned that witness memories fade and records become unreliable over time. Defense teams vowed to challenge every link in the chain of custody, raising questions about how the Ramsey letter was stored, handled, and transferred across multiple jurisdictions. Prosecutors countered with airtight documentation, from sealed lab results to video logs tracking every movement of the crucial envelope. Despite these formidable legal obstacles, The district attorney firmly set the suspect's arraignment for early next month, underpinning the swiftness that now defines a once stalled investigation. Meanwhile, Boulder's streets pulsed with an anxious blend of sorrow and anticipation. Candlelight vigils lit old memorials for JonBenet, now buzzing hubs where strangers consoled one another with memories and flowers. Town hall meetings drew crowds eager to hear updates from community liaisons working alongside law enforcement. At coffee shops, podcasts played on laptops, narrators recounting each twist and turn as baristas refilled cups and nodded empathetically. Local artisans created commemorative pins featuring JonBenet's face encircled by a justice scale. Proceeds pledged to cold case foundations. The town's collective will had transcended simple curiosity. It had morphed into a communal vow to ensure this tragedy would no longer languish in the archives of unsolved crimes. As this fourth section draws to a close, the case stands at a pivotal juncture. A suspect ensnared by the very letter he penned faces the full weight of modern forensic science, while a grieving family channels heartbreak into a quest for truth. Legal battlegrounds loom as strategies are laid for protracted courtroom showdowns. Meanwhile, a community once paralyzed by uncertainty now pulses with resolve, its candlelight vigils signaling that JonBenet's story will no longer be whispered in shadows. With an arraignment scheduled and trial preparations underway, the next chapter of this 28-year saga will unfold under the glaring spotlight of justice and the world's watchful eyes. As dawn broke on the day of the arraignment, the courthouse steps brimmed with electric anticipation. Press vans lined the curb, satellite dishes unfolding like mechanical flowers seeking a signal. Dozens of reporters jostled for vantage points, while glow-chalk silhouettes drawn by forensic teams on crime scene floors more than 2 decades earlier were replaced by lines of adhesive tape marking camera positions. Inside, the suspect entered the building under tight security, flanked by federal marshals whose black jackets gleamed in the early light. His face, half hidden by a cap, betrayed a flicker of panic as he ascended the marble stairs. The world watched, hungry for every gesture, every twitch of muscle that might hint at guilt or innocence. Once inside the courtroom, silence settled like a velvet curtain. Spectators occupied the back rows, including a handful of true crime enthusiasts whose notepads were already filled with scribbles and timelines. John and Patty Ramsey took reserved seats close to the front, hands clasped. Faces composed in the face of what felt like a cruel paradox, a father seeking justice and vindication in the very chamber where his daughter's case had gone cold. As the suspect stood at the defense table, his attorney whispered reassurances that barely registered. The bail hearing commenced with a low hum of legalese, bailiffs flipping pages of motions and memorandums sealed years ago. The judge's gavel cracked like a starting pistol, signaling the start of a hearing that balanced on razor-sharp questions of public safety and the suspect's flight risk. Prosecutors argued that the suspect's ties to the community had long remained hidden under a veneer of normalcy, and that confiscated diaries contained disturbing passages describing fantasies of control and violence that eerily mirrored phrasing in the Ramsey letter. Defense counsel countered that journals are private musings, not confessions, and warned against assuming fantasy equates to intent. The tension echoed the same moral debate that had tormented armchair investigators for decades. Does an unfiltered thought bind a suspect to a lifetime of crime? When the prosecutor revealed the chain of custody log for the Ramsey letter, complete with timestamps and digital signatures, gasps rippled through the gallery. The defense attempted to cast doubt on minor irregularities in record-keeping, but found themselves outmaneuvered as the judge pointed to the overwhelming continuity of custody. "We have assurances that no sample left the controlled environment," the prosecutor said, voice firm. "The science is sound and the link to the defendant is undeniable." The judge paused, her expression unreadable, then ordered that the suspect remain in custody pending trial, citing a reasonable likelihood that he posed a risk if released. Outside the courthouse, reactions surged in real time. Live streams captured mourners lighting candles, while skeptical critics decried the decision as premature. Social media vertexes flickered with heated debate. What if the suspect's constitutional rights were trampled? Could a jury in Boulder impartially weigh 28-year-old memories alongside newfound genetic connections? Yet others celebrated, convinced that the wheels of justice, long clogged by delays and denials, had finally begun to grind toward redemption. Fervent pleas echoed, protect the evidence, hold the suspect accountable, and above all, remember the 6-year-old girl whose fate had been overshadowed by intrigue. Back in the Ramsey residence, the family processed the hearing's outcome in private. John surveyed the framed photograph of his daughter on the mantel, recalling the curve of her smile and the sparkle in her eyes. He spoke quietly with his wife, voices carrying a mixture of relief and steely resolve. "We'll build a case not just for her sake, but for every family that has ever waited in agony," he said. Patty nodded, unspooling fresh waves of grief before drawing in a steadying breath. Their eldest child, now a young adult, sifted through old case files in the study, cross-referencing witness statements and preparing potential questions for upcoming testimony. The household had become a quiet command center for a cause that transcended personal pain. Meanwhile, pre-trial motions began to dominate legal discourse. Observers scrutinized every argument, from challenges to forensic techniques to discussions of evidentiary admissibility. The defense filed motions to suppress evidence they claimed was tainted by environmental exposure, while prosecutors countered with expert declarations on sample preservation. Media outlets dissected each brief, treating footnotes like breaking news. At the same time, nonprofit victim advocacy groups organized rallies, calling for swift trials and public accountability. Scholars weighed in on national networks, debating whether high-profile cases should be expedited to serve public interest or safeguarded to protect the accused's rights. Amid this whirlwind, the suspect remained in a private cell at the county jail, grappling with the enormity of events. He filed paperwork to represent himself, citing philosophical objections to certain forensic methods, only to have his motions rebuked by a court-appointed attorney. Time passed in a blur of docket entries, discovery disclosures, and psychiatric evaluations. Witnesses who remembered fleeting glimpses of a stranger near the Ramsey home in 1996 were interviewed anew, even as modern investigators scoured travel records and digital footprints. In itself a testament to how technology has outpaced the original investigation's limitations. As dusk settled over Boulder, the case stood poised between past and future. The arraignment and bail decision had reset expectations, igniting legal wrangling and public fervor. The trial's opening statements loomed, promising to reanimate old memories and unearth fresh details. For John and Patty Ramsey, each court date carried the weight of a lifetime spent in uncertainty. But tonight, as the community joined in candlelight vigils, a different reverberation filled the air, the sound of possibility, anchored in science, fueled by determination, and guided by the love of a father who refused to let his daughter's story fade into oblivion. As the trial dawned in late spring, the courthouse corridors thrummed with anticipation as attorneys, jurors, court staff, and national press converged on the high-ceilinged courtroom. Security was tighter than ever. Metal detectors, badge checks, and uniformed officers flanked every entrance. Inside, the judge's bench gleamed beneath shrouded chandeliers, lending an almost cathedral-like solemnity to the proceedings. Prospective jurors shuffled through rigorous voir dire. Each woman and man queried about their exposure to 28 years of headlines, blog posts, theories, and rumors. The judge, stern but fair, reminded them that prior speculation must not taint their impartiality. Scribbling notes on yellow pads, potential jurors glanced nervously at one another, keenly aware they were being asked to set aside everything they thought they knew and decide solely on the evidence presented in these hallowed walls. Meanwhile, in the gallery rows reserved for the Ramsey family and invited supporters, John and Patty sat side by side. Their faces, drawn yet resolute, were framed by the morning light streaming through tall windows. Behind them, victim advocacy volunteers offered silent solace, whispering words of encouragement. "Stay strong. We're with you. This is the moment." A handful of true crime podcasters secured seats in the far corner, laptops ready, their faces half lit by anticipation. Television crews angled cameras through the doors, capturing every glance, every deep breath, every betrayed sigh. The air pulsed with a blend of hope and dread. Hope that justice might finally be served, dread that the trial could rekindle agonies too painful to revisit. Opening statements began with the district attorney rising from behind a podium embossed with the county seal. His voice rang out clear and unwavering as he painted a concise yet harrowing picture. A 6-year-old princess of pageants turned tragic victim, a letter penned by a malefactor whose cruelty was meticulously documented, and decades of lost peace that only this moment could mend. He juxtaposed scenes of JonBenet's innocent ballot recitals against the cold, taunting sentences woven into the rambling ransom note. Then, with a dramatic pause, he revealed the linchpin, the letter's DNA, impervious to time, now positively linked to a single suspect. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, the gallery sat up straighter, as if the very walls had absorbed the weight of those words. Next, the defense attorney rose, his tone calm yet strategic. He did not deny the letter's authenticity but pivoted to questions of admissibility. How was the evidence preserved for nearly 3 decades? Could the samples have been contaminated? What about degraded fibers or environmental exposure? In soft but deliberate language, he invoked the presumption of innocence, urging jurors to remember that even the most compelling science must meet exacting standards of proof. He asked them to consider the man at the defense table, not a monster, but a neighbor, a once invisible presence with a family, bills, and a life unchanged by the passage of years. By the time he concluded, the courtroom buzzed with tension, science and human rights locked in a silent duel. With opening statements concluded, the prosecution called its first witness, the lead Boulder detective who had reopened the cold case at John Ramsey's behest. Sworn under oath, he described the painstaking steps taken to retrieve and preserve the letter, climate-controlled vaults, documented chain of custody logs, and repeat assays by independent labs. He presented magnified images of paper fibers and seal remnants, each slide accompanied by curt nods and neutral observations that belied the gravity behind them. When he testified that advanced genealogical methods had yielded a familial match, he paused to let the revelation settle. "We traced the DNA to a living relative of the defendant," he said, voice measured. From there, conventional investigative work confirmed his presence in Boulder on December 25, 1996. Under cross-examination, the defense probe for gaps was the letter exposed to moisture. Could another handler have left cells? The detective replied that every protocol had been observed, that redundant backups existed, that third-party audits verified the integrity of the process. When pressed on witness recollections from 1996, he admitted that memories fade, that some statements were second-hand. Yet he insisted that combined forensic and circumstantial evidence painted an unmistakable portrait. The jurors leaned forward, absorbing each exchange with rapt attention, their expressions a mix of concentration and empathy. Somewhere between the microscope slides and archival flight logs, the inscrutable human drama of guilt and innocence was beginning to crystallize. By late afternoon, the atmosphere shifted as the prosecution called its second witness, a forensic DNA specialist flown in from the FBI lab. She took the stand in crisp white lab coat, the epitome of scientific authority. With precise clarity, she explained how touch DNA techniques had revolutionized cold case investigations, extracting viable genetic material from objects as mundane as paper seals. She showcased charts comparing alleles, described statistical likelihoods of matches, and emphasized error margins of less than 1 in 10 million. Her diagrams lit up on screen, strands of DNA forming slender ladders in fluorescent colors, transforming abstract science into visceral proof. When she concluded that the probability of misidentification was effectively zero, a hush fell over the room, broken only by the rustle of notepads and the soft click of camera shutters. As the witness stepped down, a palpable shift rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution's case had laid bare the intersection of cutting-edge science and unflinching resolve. Jurors closed their notebooks, eyes shining with focus. In the gallery, Patty Ramsey wiped away a lone tear, while John clasped his wife's hand, squeezing it in silent gratitude. Outside, reporters prepared to broadcast headlines that would declare this the moment a frozen narrative thawed at last. And all the while, a 6-year-old girl's portrait remained at center stage, a testament to innocence lost, a call to conscience, and a beacon guiding the relentless pursuit of justice.